You know, some people age like a fine wine, and some people age like a can of special brew left on a hot windowsill. Whichever one you are, get ready to talk about those pesky little emotions of yours, because it's time for another episode of I've Had a Rosé, Let's Talk About Feelings. Please welcome your host, Sam Lake. It was me the whole time. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of I've Had a Rosé, Let's Talk About Feelings, the show where I am joined by a wonderful guest and we enjoy a drink of their choice and talk about a topic that they're passionate about and see if it connects to their feelings in any way. You might notice I am alone on the sofa today, but I am not without guests because we're doing our first ever remote recording and we've got a bloody lovely guest for our first remote recording is the wonderful Kiri Pritchard-McLean. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so honoured that I get to be the first remote guest. That feels so glamorous and like I'm someone who has had a sort of unwielding attitude to my own diary. And that is true, but it's just because I couldn't be in the room with you, so I'm very sorry.
No need to apologise. And we say women in STEM a lot on this podcast and usually as a joke, but for once I think we're actually doing it. So thank you for joining us. How are you in general? How are you doing? You're currently in rural Wales, you said?
Correct, yes, that's where I live. I live on the island of Anglesey at the top of Wales. So I am, you know what, I'm getting ready to winter. I'm getting ready to just only eat soup and do very wholesome activities. I literally Googled how do you darn a sock yesterday, so that gives you a sort of quick insight into where I am mentally.
I would love to know how to darn a sock. I don't even know, but do you know what? I'd love to know what a sock is. I'm very uneducated. It is winter time. You're very right. I can't wait for a soup. You just said Anglesey, which does explain your topic, which I'm fascinated to talk about in a moment. But we'll start by talking about what you've chosen for your beverage. So do you want to tell everybody what you've chosen for your drink today?
Yes, I have gone for, I was very specific about a size of ice cube and everything, but couldn't then find an ice cube big enough. So I have gone for a Welsh gin, and it's gin Talog. So it's made in a tiny little village of Talog in, I think it's in Carmarthen. It's in the rural Wales anyway. It's made by a wonderful gay couple. And they just put their heart and soul into it. They live on a Victorian farm. They have a small herd of sheep that they use their wool to pack the deliveries of. They only make about 40 bottles of this a year. It's made with the bay leaf from their garden. The gin is amazing. When you do gin tasting, you go into a barn in their house and they do it all with you. They're just two of the best people I've ever met, and their gin is also amazing. So I've got a bay leaf flavoured gin. I've gone for a good tonic. I didn't think it mattered, but they were like, it's most of the drink, you have to have a good tonic. So I've gone for a slim line because why wouldn't you? And it should have one big ice cube in it, but I couldn't. I tell you what, I could find one, but it was in the shape of, is it the Death Star from Star Wars? And I just thought that was too embarrassing. So I've gone without ice.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, you had me at it's made by a gay couple. Mm-hmm. We know gin. We get stuff done. If I find out that I've taken in a spirit made by a straight person, I just spit it out onto the floor. What a lovely personal connection. So you've met the people who make this particular gin as well?
Yeah, I do a podcast for the Welsh Government that's basically like a tourism thing. It's called Pod of Wales, and it's all about going out into Wales and being a tourist in our own country. And we went and did a gin tasting with these absolute babes, and they invited us into their incredible Victorian farmhouse, which is also finalist, maybe even winner of Wales Home of the Year. Like, this is a very successful, they are apex gays. They are so good at everything that they do. So we had a lovely gin tasting, and they've got like a cabinet and they didn't have much booze in it, and I was like, I thought you'd have a bigger alcohol collection than this. And Richard, I believe it was, went, bear with me one second, and then pushed through with like the most wonderful sort of like camp walk, a white stainless, well, like a white steel drinks trolley that you would find on what's it called, an airplane, and it's a Swiss Air one. So it's very chic as well that he had bought, and he was like, this is where we keep the booze, in one of those trolleys that goes up and down the aisle. So it was everything you'd want it to be.
Oh, it does. Everything that you're saying, it just gets gayer and gayer, and thus better. So what a lovely thing. Now I will say, me and Claire did yesterday try and procure our own bottle of this lovely gin. I called a place in Edinburgh called the Gin Company, thinking they would have it. And then I gave them the name. I said it's a Welsh gin. And they said, we don't carry gins from foreign countries. So, I mean, we did what we could. So I'm joining you with a gin. Unfortunately, it's not that one. But I thought, seeing as you're doing a gin that's representative of Wales, we've got one here. Oh, it's the other side of me. We've got one here that is made in Edinburgh, in Peebles, and it's called Rafters Gin. I don't know if you can see on the bottle there.
Is it made by a gay couple though?
So it's made in, right, okay, so the distiller says, oh no, that's a load of bollocks actually. No, it's probably unfortunately made by the heterosexual community. And you know what? We have to accept they are a part of society. They do have certain rights. And one of those is producing spirits. But this is actually, there is an interesting story. It's made in a hotel that was, that burnt down in the late 1800s, I think. And they also doubled up as a gin distillery. So when they got everything back up and running, they made a new gin flavour called Rafters Gin. That has like a smoky quality to it. And so that was like their way of commemorating the fire and thus returning back to being able to make gin. Isn't it lovely when a drink has like a lovely little story, either like a personal one of lovely gay people or arson?
Yeah, I think it's really nice to sort of have a tragedy attached to a spirit. I think it just gives it some new depths. I really think the Titanic's missed a sort of exclusive gin range with them, because you can get seaweed gin, because I've got some of that, and I feel like the Titanic's missed a trick there.
Ooh. Definitely. Or maybe like something, I don't know, rose flavoured, or I don't know. Surely they would get into the ice though. Surely they'd make the ice for it.
Titanic eyes, yeah. I find the branding, it's just making it,
yeah.
It's writing itself, this, yeah.
It really is. We've just started a new business. There we go. Well, I'm going to have a sip of my Rafters gin, if you've not already had a sip of your gin Talog. But cheers to you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. What would be the Scottish equivalent of Yaki Da? Cheers. Everyone just said cheers. So it's English. It's English. Lovely. Well, good. We're sipped and settled. Let's get into your topic and see how it connects to your feelings. But I can see why. Now, if I had a penny for every time that a guest on this show asked if we could talk about Henry Paget, the 5th Marquess of Anglesey, I would have 1 penny, which is more pennies than I thought I would have when I made this bet. But reading up about this person, very interesting person, lived quite a life. Now, before we get into too many details, why this person specifically? Is it because of the history? Do you relate to this person? What made you want to talk about them?
They're my Roman Empire, I think. I think Henry Cyril Paget is my resting state. I'm thinking about Henry and his life and his foibles and his connection to this area and his... I mean, he's an enigma, but also a completely open book. There is just so much to talk about. My dream one day is that I'm good enough at what I do that I get to write The Crown, but it's all about Henry, because oh my god, the costumes alone would be an absolute visual feast.
Oh my goodness. I mean, if you open up his Wikipedia page, I mean, it's very Freddie Mercury-esque in its flamboyance and also sort of like the way that he styled himself. So for anyone listening who, for whatever reason, might not know of Henry Paget, he was the 5th Marquess of Anglesey. And as soon as you gave me this topic, the second thing I Googled after Henry Paget was, what is a Marquess? Because I didn't know what one was. But it's a rank of nobility that I believe is between Duke and Earl. So somewhere in between there, that's where this person lands. So it's like a noble person. He didn't live a long life. It says he died when he was 29 in Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo, which tells you something about his flamboyance. And he essentially was quite a flamboyant man. He inherited a lot of money and then went into a lot of debt. He lived a very lavish lifestyle. If you go to his Wikipedia page, there's one whole section where it says sexuality and his penchant for cross-dressing. And then immediately after, financial trouble and death. So it got very fascinating. Now, how did you come across Henry Paget? How did you first find out about him?
Well, weirdly, even though I have been to his... So I live on the island that the house that he inherited is now a National Trust property called Plas Newydd. I live on the island. So I had been to Plas Newydd many times. Had I been sort of dragged there as a child to see outdoor Shakespeare? Absolutely. Did it rain? Of course. Was it done by people who clearly normally did theatre and education the rest of the time? You bet, yeah. So I had been to his sort of ancestral home. And in fact, the family, the Pagets, still live in this area. And weirdly, the amazing comedian Andrew White, who I'm assuming that you know, brilliant Andrew White, who is involved with Trustee Hogs, I think, is related to the family.
Yes.
So the Pagets.
No.
Yes. He's of the Paget dynasty.
I bet he is.
Yeah, which is code where I'm from. Yes, so he's one of the Pagets, if you catch my drift. So they were kind of around growing up, and there was this huge, big, stately home, and this family basically owned half the island. So I'd been there, but I didn't really know about Henry until I would say maybe the last 5 or 6 years, because for the last until the last few years, he has kind of been erased from history and in the house even. He was, there was one tiny picture of him as you were leaving. So I think it was part of one of the many sort of things. You know, every now and then people like to decide they hate the National Trust because they've decided to serve vegan sausage rolls. And they did it a while ago because they wanted to celebrate queer history. And so everyone went, well, this is ridiculous. I'm going to cancel my membership. You know, all those people that weren't really members anyway. So I think they shone a spotlight on Henry and his sexuality, which is, as you are aware, a part of his Wikipedia page. So I became aware of him. And the more, as soon as I found out one thing about him, I just wanted to know everything. And he is just a present that you keep unwrapping and finding more and more layers to him. And I once at a party was introduced to the amazing Maxine Peake, and I started sort of talking endlessly about him. And I just watched the light in her eyes go out. I was like, I've just alienated a national treasure here with how much I've spoken about this guy. So that's what, but I'm willing to risk it. That's how much he means to me.
Well, fair enough. If you're not going to, risk social capital by not talking about Henry Paget, I mean, what's the point in being alive, honestly? I mean, there is a lot to get into with this person. If say I'm Maxine Peake at a party and you want to give me like your top Henry Paget fact, what would be the first thing that you lead in with? So then I'd be like, no, you're kidding. What else is there about this man? What would be the first thing you tell me?
Okay, some of my favourite little snippets. Inherited the family home, which had a chapel on the grounds, shut down the chapel, turned it into a theatre, which he called the Gaiety Theatre. Bam, straight out the bat. He didn't know what... It's just straight in there. He didn't know what costume jewellery was, so when he wanted something made, he would just have it made with the real jewels, which means he wanted a green jacket to play ping pong in, so he had one entirely encrusted with emeralds, which was incredibly impractical because it was really heavy. So that's another great little Henry fact. When he put on these performances... go on, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, he had an emerald jacket made just for playing table tennis.
Yeah, he was like, I really think I should wear a green jacket when I play table tennis, have one made, and yeah, he had it made, and it was entirely encrusted in emeralds, but was just obviously just too heavy to do anything in. But boy, did it catch the light.
Oh, I hope I see that at Adidas or something one day. Lovely. And what? Sorry, you were gonna say another fact as well before I cut you off.
I've got so many. So I mean, he basically blew huge amounts of money. What would be about £60 million in today's money, plus an estate worth £60 million in a few years. I mean, we're talking about 5 years maybe. And then they had to do a 90 days fire sale of all his stuff, and he had 200 dogs on that, including, I think it's 3 3/4 pink poodles, because he had his poodles dyed pink, but one of them only had 3 legs, so it was 3 3/4 pink poodles. He used to have a compound put in his petrol so it smelled of roses when he drove past. And he had he would, during the interval of his performances, he would do a male burlesque routine, which led to his nickname of the Dancing Marquess. And it's really funny. They list all this stuff, and they're like, and there's a lot of questions. People think that he may have been gay. Like, yeah, maybe.
Well, did he have a lot of roommates as well? A lot of close male friends that he spent a lot of time with?
Well, yeah, they were like brothers in that they would share a bed together. No, he did marry. He married a woman, like so much nobility. He married his cousin, his first cousin. Now, she says later on, well, we never consummated. This is an amazing detail. We never consummated the relationship. The closest we got is he made me lie on the bed completely naked, and then he laid all his jewels out on me. So that is the closest that they got.
No penetration, no anything. Just get some nice jewellery lathered on top of a naked lady.
Yes, like, you know, like how people serve sushi when they're like psychopaths. I imagine it like that. Like, not even a digit up there, just a nice flat surface to lay his jewels out on. And they eventually sort of separate and live separate lives. But actually, at the end of his life, when I believe it's TB he passes away from, but you know, he's dying in Monte Carlo, she nurses him at the very end. So he maintains a good relationship with this woman. So he has strong female friendships, you know, like all the straight men of that time. Yeah.
This is fascinating because it is one of those examples of quite an obviously queer figure in history, that all of the signs are there, but people are choosing to ignore them. Are you a history buff in general, or is it just this sort of like one specific character that you have a connection to?
I really love history. I think that was my favourite subject in school. I think it's so like evocative, and you know, I think we all have to know our history to move forward in any way and to learn some lessons. But I mean, there's some people that you just learn about, and they leap off the pages, but they leap off the Wikipedia page specifically, because I'm not reading books about this stuff. And I think Henry is so like amazing in so many ways, but also it's a really interesting conversation. Like, I'm not part of the queer community. I feel like he is incredibly queer coded, but also is that our place to go back and say that when that's not what he said? And what's really difficult is that when he passed away, his family destroyed his diaries and his writings, and so we will never know his like innermost thoughts. And in fact, there weren't really any pictures, and there's a beautiful reason why the pictures still exist. And do you know what I'm fascinated by? It to me, what is clearly a queer-coded person, what I would say is a queer person, living in the area that I love, which I know to be small c conservative even now, but he was in this big rural community, you know, Welsh-speaking. He was Eton educated, ostensibly English guy, was beloved. They really loved him round here for loads of idiosyncratic reasons. And I think it's a really beautiful story about how, like, tolerance, you know, is like a two-way street. And actually, he the reason we know so much is because the locals kind of preserved parts of him, which is not in a jar. I mean, parts of his legacy.
Here's the digit that he wouldn't put in his wife. We've kept that in a jar.
I mean, the National Trust gift shops are good,
that
but they're not that strong.
Could you imagine if a National Trust shop started selling sex toys? I think that would be a good thing, especially during Pride Month. Like, celebrate yourself. Why not?
Go through, you know, when you go through the ribbons at the back of a seemingly normal shop. I love that.
A nice beaded curtain. Yeah. Lovely. I love that. What a lovely thing then that the sort of like local community kept his memory alive. I also didn't know, although I have seen it now on the page, that he went to Eton. He could have, for all we know, invented the concept of a soggy biscuit.
I think we should
You're
start
laughing because
that.
you agree. I can see it.
We should definitely start that respectful
I think
rumour.
that's a very cool... Yeah.
And maybe that's what the National Trust...
Where would we be if we didn't have that?
That's what the National Trust should sell in the gift shops in his honour, is the Marquess of Anglesey,
yes.
the dancing Marquess's soggy biscuits. It's a lovely touch. It'll go with the jams.
Go with the jams. Well, you wouldn't want a fresh soggy biscuit. That I feel like there's a health and safety issue there. It's definitely a do-it-yourself at home kind of thing, isn't it? So is it now? Is this? Would you say your connection to him is because of Anglesey? Because there are other like queer-coded figures throughout history. If you go back and look at like some of the clues that were there, we go back and we go like, oh, actually, that person was probably like. I think they always say like Shakespeare was quite could have at least been a little bit bi, which is lovely. We love a bi king. But do you think the strength of your connection to this person is mostly because of like the local connection?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I also think that Henry did really interesting things in terms of gender, and so that's why I use the phrase queer about him. That I definitely think that he played with gender and form a lot, which I think is amazing. I think it is because it's local, and it's because I guess for so many years growing up around here, if you feel anyway kind of different, and I don't claim to have the experience that like a queer person has, but sometimes you can just feel like this isn't, I don't feel like the other people around here, and there's all sorts of reasons why I felt like that growing up.
Yeah.
That you do find like kinship with someone else who might have been an outsider. But when you see someone who's just absolutely doing it on their own terms and is kind of celebrated for that in an area that I always assumed, well, that the minds aren't big enough for that kind of thing around here. I think it gave me a new appreciation of this area and the people, and I think also like even though I'm from a farm and from a farming background, that like I can definitely, since moving to the city as well, I can do that really lazy thing of assuming people from the countryside aren't ready for so much stuff and like short shrift basically, when actually they can be just as progressive as people in cities, and in some cases even more so. And so I think it's also like just a big celebration of community, and it's mad like because I'll be driving on the roads that I know that he used to speed on, because he used to drive everywhere too quickly. He loved cars. He used to drive like a converted hearse that had 4 winged armchairs in it and stuff. Like I can see it. I can see it so clearly. I've been around that house a million times. Like, I'd see the views that he had, and there's like a sunken swimming pool that attaches to the sea, like in the Straits. So I can imagine him having these wild parties, and it's also there's so many like what's the right phrase, but like so many things that I've like loved over the years that cross over with him. So like the mad costume jewelry, but also like he went to see an Arthur Conan Doyle play, and while he was there, some of his jewels were stolen, and so he went backstage and was like, get me Arthur Conan Doyle, and then was like, solve this for me. And then he did solve it. And, like, so I've been obsessed with Sherlock Holmes since I was a kid. And, like, there's just so much of it. It's, like, pushing all my sort of buttons of things I'm interested in.
So he's become, like, a gateway for you to enjoy other things in life as well. So that's a really cool thing. And I really love what you were saying about how it makes you think of, like, your area in a different way as well. Because I'm from Cornwall. And also queer, and it's like you can go back and you just think, oh, this isn't like the right place for me, that's why I probably left, but really it is just a case of finding that community, isn't it? And you can find that community anywhere. It's just harder to find it in some places than others, and often when you find that community, it's not necessarily because you specifically went looking for them, it's because you did things, or you went looking for things that you wanted for yourself anyway, and then you found like-minded people, and that's how like your little network grows. So I think that's a really lovely thing, and that it does sort of like I don't know, it makes me want to learn more about him. A question I did have was if there was someone that he compares to perhaps in more modern culture. Is there anyone that comes to mind who has the same energy as a Henry Paget?
That is so interesting. I think maybe that's why I love him, because he's kind of unmatched. Maybe it is Freddie, because there's a really interesting... he was ridiculed in the press for burning money and for, you know, having this kind of bizarre habit of doing male burlesque and being very sort of feminine. And there's this amazing article I've read with a guy who interviews him. I think it's from the Times. It's from very sort of traditional broadsheet. And he turns up, and he was like, I was expecting him to turn up dripping in jewels and wearing something ridiculous. And the journalist sort of says that to him, and he just is a complete Etonian and was like, oh no, I much prefer a hunting tweed, my old boy, and knew how to slip into that super mask, super trad, super like high class thing of like code switching basically is probably a form of protection. And this journalist is quite taken with him, and I just thought, what an amazing guy that was like being completely himself and authentic in the countryside, and then when he needed to go and kind of schmooze someone to do like a profile, was completely able to rub shoulders with these you know, really conservative people. And I just think that in himself, I don't know anyone who does that, and I think he's being authentic in both senses. I think, you know, he comes from a big military family, and I think there probably were both aspects to him, and I don't actually think there's anyone who lives their trueness as much as that in both aspects, the duality, let's say. But maybe Freddie, because, you know, he was so like mask in so many ways, but then like had this amazing sort of like feminine energy, but in such a like forthright way, in a way that we perceive as being very masculine. So yeah, and then of course both just a big lover of big moustache as well. So yeah.
I love that you were making like this really poignant point about the duality of existence and code switching and all these things, and you're like, and also it's a lovely mustache, it's a lovely tash, that is. It does carry a lot, one thing that I did think was interesting, so this is like, I guess this might be quite a big question, but he obviously was a nobleman, and so he came from like a lot of privilege, and so that probably meant that him as this very flamboyant queer person, because he's got all of these advantages that lots of other people at that time wouldn't have had, that probably was one of the things that emboldened him to put on a male burlesque show whilst driving around in his hearse full of armchairs. How do you feel about, I guess, like nobility in general? Like, is it just something that you are interested in from a historical point? Do you think like nobility now is like something different? Does it make you feel any different about, you know, the idea of nobility in the UK?
That's interesting. I generally have a sort of pretty extreme aversion to like, you know, inherited wealth and especially when it comes to the royal family, of like literally the idea that they're divinely born to lead. But with Henry's an interesting one because his family, and some of whom are wealthy. I think his whatever would have been like great granddaughter is like a model and an actor, and the things that rich children become as jobs. And I think his great whatever it would have been grandson is. I think he lives locally still and is, whatever those boys do. I don't know him, so I'm very. There's only like 60,000 people on my island, so I can't speak too strongly. But I think it's like with anything, right? We're all gifted access and privilege in certain ways. There's very few people who have no access or privilege in some part, and that can be the fact that you can have or be marginalized in lots of different ways, but you can be part of a family network that's supportive, and there can be people with privilege in a million ways but who are completely on their own and don't have that. So we all have like on our top trumps card we have different points, right? But so I think it's always how you wield it. And one of the things I love about Henry is that he had all this money. He was incredibly generous, which is one of the reasons why he burned through it. And he also was incredibly generous in that he would put on these performances for the locals for free. And that is one of the reasons that they loved him, because these were people who were not getting to see the theatre. It was a very exclusive, as it still is, very exclusionary activity. And he was like, we're doing a panto, everyone come along. He wanted an audience. It's not complete altruism. And he used to hand out pictures of himself in the interval, which is the pictures that remain of him in his costumes, because a little old lady on the island had kept hold of them all, which is a really beautiful thing. But I think someone who's willing to like fling open their doors like that's like a positive way to do it. And also part of me thinks, yes, probably people lost lots of jobs because he couldn't manage money, but like he did share the wealth, he did spend it, he did sort of pass it round, and that is I'd much rather he did that than sat on it and accumulated more. I'd rather he spent it on jewels. And he went to see a play and he was like, these guys are great. And he said to them, he went backstage, he was like, I've got to meet them. So he went and met them, and he was like, God, it was great. And he was like, so what do they pay you to do this kind of thing? Because they were touring Europe at the time. And they said, oh, we're on this much. And he went, okay, I'll double it. You work with me now. And then just brought the theatre company to him. So he had this theatre company. And so he paid people well. And, there's all sorts of worries about power dynamics there, being friends with someone that you're working for and beholden to. But, yeah, I think he to me represents someone who recognises I have privilege, and with that I'm going to open doors, I'm going to create joy, I'm going to spend money, I'm going to have the beautiful spoilt life that I am, but I'm also going to make sure other people come along for the ride. And so I think if you're going to have privilege in any way, he shows how you can use it for positive. Sure, you're dead by 29 and the family don't acknowledge you, but what a jacket.
What a lovely jacket. Yes, of course. I don't know if this is the right conclusion to come to here, but everything you just said about him made me think that Henry Paget would have absolutely stormed the Edinburgh Fringe. Do you not think? Because he puts on his own shows, he hands out pictures of himself halfway through, flyering, he pays people fairly. Okay, that maybe doesn't happen at the Fringe all of the time, but it sounds like he would have loved it. And I think, I don't know if I mean that, it sounds like an insult, but
it is.
I don't mean it as one.
His family are very well connected, ergo he's definitely going to get a nomination. He will, there'll be loads sunk into that show. He will have a lighting designer, he will have someone writing songs for him, like all the privileged kids do, and they don't wear it on their sleeve, and everyone would go, God, a star is born, and you're like, yeah, it's literally been born into nobility. That's how this stuff happens. But also, the thing that's important to me about him is he's an English guy. He grew up in France, but he learnt Welsh so he could speak to the locals, and that is not something that people did in that time. It's not something that people do now when they move to this area. And it's always been a very, very Welsh-speaking area. And I just think, well, that is a guy who understands what's important to people and also is looking to communicate in the best, most effective way for a group of people. And there was no obligation for him as a landowner of a big, estate to ever be able to communicate with the people who lived on it in their own language. But he made that effort.
He just sounds like a very nice guy. He just sounds like he'd be fun to have a little gin with. which I think is the sign of a good person, isn't it? Just to sum up then this chat about Henry Paget, when you think of Henry Paget, like, how would you sum up your feelings about him? How does he make you feel, either as a person, or what sort of emotions does he conjure up when you think about his life and times?
I think he's a really great... I never want to dwell on, like, he died very young, and he had been sort of sent away and given a what he believed to be a meagre allowance, but was still quite generous by those standards. And he was sort of, you know, it was a shameful thing for the family that they'd lost this estate and this money, and for his sort of frivolity. And, you know, there's a really sad fact that apparently when his body arrived at the train station in Bangor, none of the family was there to meet it. And they destroyed his diaries, and, you know, and they tried to erase his legacy. But that's a really sad part of it. But whenever I think about him, I think of queer joy in the countryside, in Wales, in rural Wales. And that, to me, like, is... and that his legacy, even though they've tried to hide it and they have destroyed those diaries, like, it's from a collection of photos and a few, you know, and interviews and people who knew him in contemporaneous sort of interviews from people and writings. We know so much about this guy without it needing to have read his diary. Like, we know exactly who this person was. And they were bringing a really fabulous, not for very long, they weren't around for very long, but like a very fabulous line in queer joy to the countryside. And I just think that gives me, like, all the feels.
Do you know what? That is exactly what is missing from that show, Jeremy Clarkson's Farm. It needs queer joy in the countryside. Jeremy Clarkson needs to suck a farmer off. We've said it. That's what needs to happen.
I would argue the fucking shit he's putting out in the press is exactly what he's doing. He's at least tickling the balls of farmers when he's pushing back against this inheritance tax.
A gooch is getting sniffed, isn't it? For sure, it is. What a lovely chat about Henry Paget. Just before we wrap up the episode, we've got one last little segment to do with you, Kiri. And this is called Quickfire Feelings. So all I've got here, I've got 5 random things, and I just want you to very quickly tell me how they make you feel. And the first thing on the list, we ask this to every guest. We're doing a little bit of a poll on this. How do you feel about dark chocolate?
Love it. Absolutely love it. My fave.
In the love camp. Oh, fave over milky.
Well, I'm vegan as well, so it's more consistent. I even have a specific type that I access for period pains. So listen, I've got a whole box of things going on. Yeah, dark chocolate is the one.
Okay, very good. All right. How do you feel about sleeping with the bedroom window open?
Oh, God, there's someone who's living in my house at the moment who does that. Listen, I live in the countryside. There's too much creepy stuff going on out there. I don't want to hear if someone drives up my lane. I'd rather die in my bed. I don't want to hear foxes screaming like a strangled woman at night. I don't want to hear the owls. I don't want to hear any of it, because the countryside is weirdly noisy, but in creepy ways. So shut that thing up now.
Fair enough. I'm with you on that. I completely agree. How do you feel about the term Riz?
I'm not confident I know what it is, but I think it's a chat-up line, right? Is it like having the chat? Is that what it is?
I think it's short for charisma. So if you've got Riz, then it means that you've got something.
Right, so it's like having the chat. Okay. Honestly, I just feel like it's one of the real flags in the sand that I am old now, and I have to and also I've got no business using it. I think if you have to ask someone to clarify what it is, it's not yours to have then, and don't make it embarrassing by trying to use it in stand-up or conversations.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, no need to get off the skibbity toilet. There's no need for you to be there, is there? Next thing, how do you feel about just a good nap?
I literally had one before I did the call. I'm a bad I'm bad for napping. So I had, it was 15 minutes till we were doing this, and I was like, well, I can have 10. So I set my alarm, and literally before I arrived, I had 10 minutes, and I had my 4 minutes. I had a wee. I had 4 minutes to set up, and I was 2 minutes late, so maybe the match should have been shorter, but still fit it in.
And at least you're honest about it. No shame. I love that. Very good. And finally, how do you feel about the Lisa Scott Lee Dubai-based dance company?
Well, I didn't know she had a dance company, but there's a lot of things that I'm sort of morally opposed to in that. Dubai, dance schools in general, and Lisa Scott Lee is, I mean, she's Welsh, so I'll give her that, but she's the worst step, I would say. So, yeah, I think I'm against every aspect of it.
It's rare that you hear such a bold statement as Lisa Scott Lee is the worst step when Lee Latchford Evans is right there.
Yeah, but I think he is a beautiful example of like how someone can kind of baby's day out their way through a career. Someone who can just be swept along because they're amenable and good looking as a teenager and just really forge a career out of that. But I did love her. I mean, we all love the solo show that she did where she's sort of trying to relaunch, and there's some absolutely cracking gifs and memes that have come out of that. It really keeps giving.
Oh, yeah, of course, where she's like, they tell her that she's got to number 21 in the charts. She's like, oh, that's shit. That's really shit. We're B-list. Yeah, we're B-list at Capital Radio.
It's so good.
Oh, well, fair enough. You know, your feelings about steps are true and valid. Kiri, that brings us to the end of the pod. I hope you've had a lovely time. And before we let you go, if you've got anything to plug, now is your chance. I know that you're going to be up here on tour, I think this week, the week that this podcast goes out, if you want to tell people about that.
Oh, yes, I'm going to be in Scotland for that whole week. In fact, I've only got a handful of tour dates left, so I'm going to do Edinburgh, I'm going to do Aberdeen and Melrose, and then after that, I think I'm just doing Carlisle, Darwin, and then Bangor, my hometown. Yeah, so I've only got a few tour dates left, so if you want to come and see Peacock on tour, you'd be so welcome to. And if you're like, you know what, I can't make any of those, I've got shows online that you can watch as well.
Lovely. And where can people find you on socials if they wish to follow?
Principally Instagram. Yeah, Kiri Pritchard-McLean on Instagram. I mean, I don't really go. I honestly just post on Twitter once a day to talk about sales figures, and then I disappear again because it's obviously a bin fire, and I also feel a bit too old for TikTok. But I'm in the market for social media because I think it's only a matter of time before the thick aunties take Instagram as well. So I've got to find somewhere new to head to.
We've lost Facebook to the Facebook mums long ago. The Instagram's going to the aunties. Twitter's going to, I don't know,
your right-wing brother-in-law.
Steroid abusers? Yeah. There we go. We said the same thing with different words, didn't we? Well, listen, Kiri, it's been lovely having you here. And definitely go check out Kiri's show Peacock on tour and follow her on social media. And you can follow the podcast at I've Had a Rosé, where we put up little clips and little treats and things for you. And we will see you again for another episode very soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for having me.